Andrew Buckmichael, so glad to have you on the podcast today. I feel like you are the most loyal of listeners, but after talking to you briefly, I realize it's because you spend, like hours and hours a day running. So of course you have to listen to something. But welcome to Off the Radar. You've been on a few times. Glad to have you back on again.
Thank you. It's an honor as always.
All right, so I decided I needed to have you on to talk about the end of the year and go through some of our favorite podcast episodes of the year. But before we get into all of that, it's been a really big year as far as not only podcast episodes, but like weather in general. Tell people who you are. You are one of our local meteorologists.
Yeah, so I'm the morning meteorologist for our ABC and Fox affiliate for the Sinclair stations in Columbus, Ohio. So weather has been a huge year. We have a record number of tornadoes here in Ohio this year, more than we've ever had before. Actually, 15 more tornadoes in Ohio than the previous record. So it's been a very active year here in Ohio and just across the entire country with Helene and all of these other storms that were making national headlines, not only for a day or two, but for weeks and months on end. And I'm excited to be here today to talk with you about this because, as you mentioned, I run a lot. So I have ample hours. I think my Spotify rap said I listened to upwards of 20,000 hours of podcasts within the last year.
Oh, I edit a podcast and I don't think I've got to that level. That's amazing.
I do cheat though. I do listen to it at typically 1.5 speed or a little faster, depending on the podcast.
I've heard that trick. That's like a pro tip when it comes to podcast listening. Okay, so you've listened to every episode of Off the Radar. Can't wait to hear your take on what's been going on this year. But you have a podcast too, right?
I do, Weathering the Run. So I just talk with runners. If I'm going out running with somebody, they always are hesitant to start talking about weather because they're like, I don't want to talk work with you, but I don't mind. We're just out there just running. So yeah, I just basically talk to runners about the craziest weather that they've run through. So it's just called Weathering the Run. And it's basically just a labor of love because it's not associated with work. I don't have any sponsors, don't get paid for it, but it's just me just chatting with runners. And there have been some pretty crazy stories from them.
Interesting. Okay, and then also we recognize you, of course, because of your bucket. You do this segment for the National Weather Desk called Weather Bucket. Can you explain what that is for folks who don't know?
Yeah, my middle name's Buck, and I answer a lot of questions. I mean, there's always questions coming in on Facebook and Twitter, just random weird questions like, why is there this halo around the moon at night? And so I was like, you know what? I should just answer these questions and just kind of devote some sort of channel or an outlet to answer the weather questions. So I do my best. Sometimes the questions not necessarily completely weather related, so I have to do a little bit of research, and it just broadens my knowledge as well.
Yeah, I do that too. Like when I'm coming up with a video idea or something for the podcast or something for the National Weather Desk, I have to do research too, but that's kind of the job as a meteorologist, especially at a TV station, because you are the only scientist generally at the TV station, right? So everybody comes to you with all science questions, even though we have these degrees in a very specific field.
It's true. And I have gotten a lot better this year. And I've kind of warned my coworkers. I was like, if I don't know an answer, I'm going to tell you I don't know. And I've gotten a lot more comfortable with that. I can go look it up and I'll research it. But if you put me on the spot, I'm not going to make a lie or make something up because I don't want that to happen. I want to let you know that I don't know this, but I'll look it up.
Right. And the benefit of having like a scientific background is knowing where to look it up, right? Like reputable sources or like a scientific journal. So we know the places to go, even if we don't know the exact answer.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about the podcast. This is, we're almost 2 years into Off the Radar at this point. So I think, in like a month or two, I'm coming up on the 100th episode, which I'm very excited about. So I want to count down with you. We kind of each went through and came up with our top 10 episodes of the year. Do you want to start or do you want me to start?
I'll go ahead and start because this one is something I just read this book and that probably gives it away a little bit.
Well, first, before you say that, are you starting with 1 or 10? Are you going to go?
I'm starting with 10. I want to work. Is that fine?
Yeah. Should we do like you do 10 and I do 10, or should you go through all 10 and then I go through all 10?
Let's go. I like it if we both do 10 and then we kind of work together towards 1.
Perfect. I love it.
So number 10 for me is going to be The Last Train to Key West.
I just got goosebumps. I love that episode.
It's a great episode, and I love Key West. And there's actually a Keys 100 race where you start in Key Largo and you run all the way down to Key West. So I want to do that one day. It's kind of on my bucket list to go and do. But I love the episode. I you know how I listen to podcasts. I also requested the audiobook. It took about 8 or 9 weeks to finally get the audiobook, but I just finished the book as well, probably about a week ago.
Oh, I wish I would. Well, I guess you don't want the actual book version. I was going to say I have the book version. I loved it so much because I love Key West as well, but I actually grew up going on vacation to the Keys. So all of the spots were like, I knew of them, but I didn't know all these facts about them. And I really didn't know that much about that hurricane and like the historical influence there of the post World War One. So I love that you picked that. It didn't make my top 10 list, mostly because it was actually a rerun from the previous year. So I guess on a technicality, I decided not to include it in my top
Well, I
10.
included it because I read the book this year, so it made
So
mine.
it's a this year, basically. All right.
What about
so
for you?
my number 10 was actually a very recent episode. And it was humanizing hurricane forecasting with the deputy director from the National Hurricane Center, Jamie Rowe. And the reason I picked this one was I actually didn't go into this episode thinking it was going to be like an amazing episode, but because of Jamie, it was, because we kind of took this turn in the conversation and we didn't really talk as much about the 2024 hurricane season as much as we did like hurricane forecasting in general and what we do wrong and how we don't factor in like the human influence. And, I feel like we hear it over and over again when they talk about impact forecasting and, hazards and focusing on that instead of the cone. But the way that he talked about it in terms of like consequence and the communities, and then even thinking about Helene this year and how it struck an area most severely that was nowhere near the coastline, like hundreds of miles from the coastline. So some of that stuff was really impactful to me personally. So that's why I picked that. And also we talked about kind of the shift in the messaging coming from the Hurricane Center. I don't know if you remember that one statement they put out where they said this hurricane is going to be unsurvivable. And it was a term they had never used before. And it was so impactful because it was the first time they used it. So messaging, very important.
Yeah, I learned a lot from that episode, and just because it's not just knowing the weather, it's also communicating it and letting the public know what to be prepared for. And with hurricanes, it's not just the rain, it's not just the winds. There's so many aspects to it. It's the heat and the power outages after the storm's over. So there's some things that you don't think about. And I learned a lot from that episode.
Yeah. And also that period of time, 5 to 10 years later after a hurricane, and how people can still be impacted at that point. Fascinating. Okay. Number 9, what you got?
Number 9 is the day the clock stopped. I grew up really close to Xenia. My dad is also a meteorologist. He went to Purdue University.
Stop. Your dad is a meteorologist?
He went for agricultural meteorology. So he spent his, I guess, career farming rather than on TV like myself. So he's told me stories about watching the clouds that day. He was probably about 40 miles away from where the storm was, the Xenia tornado, the F5 that hit there back in 1974. But he's told me stories about it. I grew up hearing just other stories and just growing up in the area just about the Xenia tornado and how deadly it was, how unique that situation was. And the Dayton station did our Sinclair station there did a really good documentary on the 50-year anniversary of that Xenia 5 tornado.
Yeah, they did. And they came to me and said, this would be a great episode. And I watched the documentary and I couldn't believe I'd never heard of it before, but it was so well done. His name is blanking on me. Adam Arrow. Yes. Did an amazing job with that. And he's the news director there now. Did you see that?
Yeah, he and I first started in Columbus the exact same day. We worked on the weekend shift together. So he and I go back a long ways, and we had a lot of fun when we worked the weekend shift.
You guys kind of look alike too.
We have been told that before.
All right. My number 9 is another recent episode, Rivers in the Sky. It was all about atmospheric rivers. And this one I chose mostly because of feedback I've gotten from other people. I guess I didn't realize that it was going to be as impactful when I did it and put it out. But I heard from so many people that they loved this episode. And I was trying to figure out why before I got on here today. And I think part of it is just the lack of knowledge about atmospheric rivers. I think people were interested in learning about it. And Marty Ralph, the guy that I interviewed, such an important person in like the weather world and making this term known to people. So that's why I included it. And then, the biggest compliment, this is somebody who interviews people. We got off the call and Marty told me that it was one of the best interviews. He said he does interviews all the time, and it was one of the best conversations he had. And I was like blown away that he would think that. So I think just the feedback from that episode is the reason I chose it. And then also I want to fly. I want to go on a reconnaissance mission.
Yeah, and it was interesting too because you think of the hurricane hunters that are now flying in these atmospheric rivers.
Mm-hmm.
They're flying through an eye wall. There's a lot of turbulence. There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things going on. But to fly through an atmospheric river, it's something. It's not new, but the research in it and everything. Him trying
Mm-hmm.
to describe of where they're trying to drop those instruments in the storm and everything. It was really interesting to hear what they're doing to help predict those.
Yeah, and how great it is that they are able to come up with this scale that maybe has a lot more, meaning or impact as far as communication than perhaps like the Saffir-Simpson scale. All right, what you got for number 8?
Number 8, I have Helene surviving an inland hurricane. Obviously, the storm was very deadly. It was in national headlines for weeks. I mean, it still is. They're still going to be cleaning up for quite a while. But to get the perspective from a meteorologist that was on the ground there, covering the storm, and how he said, there's been times too where you have a lot of power outages. He's like, who are we on TV for right now? No one's got power
Mm-hmm.
right now. So how they kind of pivoted and tried doing a lot of social media, YouTube, Facebook, and other things to make sure that they're getting the message out to the public. So it was really insightful to listen to that from a different perspective.
Yeah, you have a theme here, like destruction so far as your top 10 list.
They do. There's the theme changes coming up.
Okay, good. Okay, well, that episode is one of my favorites, as you will see in a few minutes as well. So yeah, we can talk more about that one coming up in just a second, but I 100% agree. Jason was a fantastic interview, and he's a great meteorologist, and I've known him for a very long time because I interned with him a long time ago. Okay, number 8 for me is Love is in the Air Pressure. And I chose this one because it's a little bit different from some of the other stuff that I've done, but it was really so this one came out Valentine's Day, and I wanted to do something kind of like, a little sassy, a little cute for Valentine's Day. So I thought I would do a little investigation to see if weather affects sexual behaviors of humans and animals. And kind of the short answer is definitely animals, because they're doing it for like one reason only.
Right.
To reproduce, and humans operate a little bit differently, but it's a fun episode, definitely worth a re-listen or a listen for the first time if anybody hasn't listened to it. It talks about insects, humans, some fun discussions.
I liked how too kind of looked at the calendar dates too, when most humans are born around September timeframe.
I know, spoiler alert, there's a lot of babies that are conceived around Christmas time, which we got coming up.
Right.
I think it just has to do with time off more than anything.
Number 7?
Number 7, go for it.
Meteorologist moms.
Yay! Lots of coworkers in that one.
Yeah, a lot of coworkers in that one. And it's interesting too, because I've covered some maternity leave before, and, it's just kind of part of the job. And at times that was actually how I got some freelance jobs, because they needed some extra help. So
yeah, me too.
It's interesting to get the perspective, and I was really blown away with some of the stories that, like Chicago, how her water broke while she was at work.
I know. I think they say like only 10% of births, the water breaks not at the hospital. But so many people I know that it happens. She's not the only person I've heard that that's happened before, but it's wild that she was literally on TV. Because like how when you're talking about percentages, you're like not on TV for that long of a period of time. And she's a chief meteorologist. So for that to happen, it's kind of wild.
What about you for number 7?
Number 7, I have Baseball's Meteorological Mysteries. So this one I love for a couple of reasons. One of my very best friends was on it. Morgan Adsit is the sports anchor in Baltimore, Maryland at our station there. And her and I used to work together. So I had her on for the beginning, but then I interviewed the MLB scientist, which is a thing, apparently. And he was talking about this new model that's being used, Weather Applied Metrics. They use this wind model in ballparks, and it helps determine like the speed and trajectory of what balls might do. And it's really fascinating. And not only are they using it to forecast games coming up, they look at old situations. And I love like forensic meteorology and historical events. Gettysburg was another of those episodes that didn't make the list for me, but I really loved. So this one was all about Ted Williams and that famous home run and the Red Sea to Fenway. We talk about that and kind of go through some conspiracy theories, and there's some cool answers that they came up with that they were able to solve with this new weather modeling.
I'm giving away my number 6, but that was my number 6.
Gettysburg?
No, the baseball.
Baseball? Oh, okay. Oh, good. Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that lined up perfectly.
It did. And I actually contacted one of my friends, and he's more into the computer modeling and stuff like that. And I told him, I was like, man, what if you could take a stadium, say football stadium, and you map it 3D, the buildings around it, and then you say, all right, for every direction the wind's coming and for every speed, what's going to happen inside that stadium for the kickers, whether they're kicking a field goal, a punt, it could really impact what's going to happen. And he burst my bubble, and he's like, all right, there's the company that's already doing this, Weather Applied Metrics. And I was like, man, this would have been a great idea to come up with this company. So it was really interesting to hear about that, because I didn't know about it until I heard the episode. I just found out about it before I heard the episode. So it was like serendipitous that I came up with the idea, and also, well, I guess somebody else's idea that's already been out there, but also heard the episode.
Yeah, it's funny because I found out about the company, I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. They've been around for a while. I met somebody at a conference who is one of the owners of the company. And I kept going back to it and thinking, and then I never really did more with it. And then just recently, MLB brought in the modeling. So it's more recent, just in the past couple of years, that they started actually using it. But yeah, I've been wanting to do that episode for a while, and it turned out even better than I could have imagined. Okay, so that was your number 6, right? All right, my number 6, and I didn't even know if you've even listened to this one yet because it just came out, was the tsunami episode. So it's 2024, 20 years ago, hard to believe, was the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. So I did a whole episode on that, and really it was the story of survival. And this is part 1 of 2. I've got another episode coming out in January, but Dwayne Meadows survived it. He worked for NOAA at the time, and he tells his whole story of survival, which is just wild, horrifying, heart-wrenching, heartbreaking. So that is one of my favorite episodes, but also it was definitely a tough one to edit and put together.
Yeah, just that one. I started that one, but I was trying to cram the other ones that I might have missed through the year. I was like, oh, I got about 3 I need that I happen to miss. I started that, and I didn't know if it was going to apply to the top 10 here, because it was a 2-parter. You're like, this is 2-parter. I was like, oh, she won't include that because we won't get to part 2.
Psych. I did.
Yeah, it was. But yeah, there was a lot of motion to that episode.
Yeah. And, if you keep it's a long episode, but it's worth it to go to the end too, because there's a lot of talk of kind of the emotional and mental recovery coming out of natural disasters and how it's different from, other trauma. He discusses that a lot, and he was very, very open with me about it, which I really appreciated. So he was great.
Number 5.
What you got?
All right. Number 5, I have Storming the Digital World.
Yay. I love that episode.
It's something that I've thought about just in the sphere that we're in now. It's not broadcast only. I have my certified broadcast meteorologist seal from the American Meteorological Society, and I've thought about, should I go for the digital seal too? And we do so much on the digital spectrum. I mean, look at us right now. That's not on TV, and the people are consuming it in way more ways than just TV. So it was interesting to hear all of the inside baseball talk with that.
Yeah. And, the 2 guys that I was talking to on that episode, since that came out, their company shut down their portion of their weather enterprise portion of the company, and they lost their jobs. So they no longer have those jobs or that podcast, which is awful, but they're both certified digital meteorologists, and hopefully we'll find something else. And also they can do stuff on their own with that seal. And also, since that episode, I got my CDM. So my plan, and my role is certainly different from yours. You're still on TV, but I'm not anymore. So I'm going to let my CBM expire here at the end of the year, and I'm going to just have the CDM going forward. So yeah, it's a shifting world.
Yeah. And it helped drive home how quickly things are changing, and there's so much information out there, how important it is to make sure that you're getting it from a credible source. So again, that's the big reason why the American Meteorological Society came up with this idea, is to make sure that whoever you're getting this information from is a credible source that actually has spent years studying and researching what's going on with our weather.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just checking. I had that originally on my top 10 list and it kind of got bumped, but I'm really glad it's on yours because that's one of my favorites as well. I just love the format too of just talking kind of like you and I are now, and it not just being an interview.
Mm-hmm.
All right, my number 5, which is like a personal favorite of mine, is reliving Twister. So Twister was such an influential movie in my life. Huge. I mean, it's the reason I became a meteorologist. So when I slid into the DMs of a few Twister stars and one of them got back to me and said, yes, 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 I was so thrilled. Wendell Josepher, she played Haynes on the original Twister movie. She was one of the storm chasers. She was so nice. She gave me such a long time. I mean, we talked for like 2 hours. I edited it way down, but she was fantastic. And it just made me want to go watch the movie again, listen to the soundtrack again. And it was fun to hear the perspective of somebody who's not a meteorologist, who was like thrown into this world of weather and storm chasing and, had to learn about weather. Whereas we tend to look at these movies with like a critical eye and talk about what's not accurate. So it was cool to get a different perspective from an actor.
That was a fun one. I really enjoyed that. It didn't make my top 10, but I really did enjoy that one.
Yeah, I think there's a certain generation of us that were highly influenced by that. So
that's a big reason my wife got into meteorology as well.
Yeah, awesome. Wait, your wife is a meteorologist?
Yeah.
Stop it. Is she on TV?
No, she does real estate appraisal now.
Did she used to be on TV? Is that how you guys met?
No, we both just went to Ohio State together, and that's where we met. And thankfully, she's been pretty flexible with where she can work and stuff. So she works from home now and does real estate appraisal.
Wow. So it's like a whole family affair for you.
Yeah.
Cool.
My daughter's name is Summer Rain, but we're not forcing her into weather.
Do you know Sonia Stevens at the station in Charleston?
Yeah.
Her daughter's name is Weatherly.
Oh, that's a great name.
Yeah. And it's cute because she abbreviates it WXLY.
That's great. I love that. We thought about naming my son something weather related, but everything was just so cliche. Like, we're not going to do storm or thunder.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number 4, this one goes really well after your Twister one. It's behind the scenes of Twisters. It's a great episode.
A good one.
One of the professors at Ohio State and also OU, Ohio University, she was actually one of the consultants to make sure that the movie was scientific. And there was a lot that went into it, I think, this time when they made Twisters, to try to make sure that everything was about as accurate as they could make it. Obviously, it's a movie, it's Hollywood. But that was really insightful to hear that, and just how much goes into those movies and how much excitement there was from the weather community. I mean, we obviously saw it. We have friends that were, at the premieres or other things like that. It was really cool to go and see that. And I watched it twice in the movie theater and countless times since.
Yeah, I've seen it a few times too. And it's funny though, I think my heart still lies with number 1. Like, even though scientifically it was not nearly as accurate. But that was kind of the fun of it. It had a little bit more of like a cheeseball factor about it, the little one-liners and the cliche.
The original had so many one-liners.
Okay, my number 4 was, and it was kind of a 2-parter, Science Moms. So this one, really part 1, but part 2 as well, was with one of the actual Science Moms, this organization of climate scientists that's trying to educate mothers about climate change. And when I was going into this episode, I was trying to think of something unique and different I could put into it. So I put a call out to like a lot of fellow mothers, friends, and I said, what questions do you have about climate change? A lot of times when I do that with podcasts, I get absolutely nothing. But this one was overwhelming. I got so many questions from people, and they recorded them. They did voice memos. They sent in emails, texts, and videos. So I had Melissa answer all those questions, Melissa Burt. And it was hard. Like, when I was editing this one, I feel like I cried several times because they were people I knew. They were voices I knew, like very heartfelt, concerned voices. So it was interesting to hear my friends on a couple of podcast episodes. So for that reason, for personal reasons, that was one of my top ones.
I love that one too, because it opened the door to learning how you can communicate with your kids about climate change or other things like that. Because I talked to my kids. I was like, what do you guys know about climate change? And just to try to get their perspective on everything. So it was definitely a very insightful episode.
Cool. All right, we're headed into the top 3. What you got for number 3?
Number 3 is Surviving More, a young girl's journey from a tornado survivor to meteorology student. I think that a lot of us that are in meteorology have something that they can pinpoint what brought them into weather, what kind of sparked that creativity or the thirst for knowledge or just understanding. And I vividly remember the Moore tornado. I was working here in Columbus at the same station, and the video started coming in. Our chief meteorologist started crying because he was like he put himself in the mindset of, what if that was my kid in some of these schools? Like, we're seeing the damage from the schools and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I reported on it, what we could report at the time. And I also had a handful of friends that were students at Ohio State. They were wrapping up their time there, and they were out chasing that tornado. And they were there when the tornado started to form, basically when it was just the funnel, and they continued to track it into more. They were really excited, posting these pictures and stuff from it. And once they realized what came of that tornado, they were like, all right, we got to dial back how excited we were to see this tornado, because that was such a deadly tornado. I mean, to hit two schools like that, absolutely heartbreaking.
Yeah, and for anybody who didn't listen to that episode, the silver lining is it's about this girl who survived, and she lost two of her siblings in the tornado. She's now becoming a meteorologist. She's a meteorology major at Texas A&M. So a little story of inspiration kind of woven through the tragedy of her story as well. So that's definitely an important episode. My number 3 was also, I feel like, an important episode, an important one for people to hear. It was Weather Wars and the Future of NOAA. And this one was all about, it spawned from a lot of misinformation and rumors that were online among like the meteorology world and among the NOAA world about Project 2025. People are throwing this out here, this is what's going to happen in 2025. There's a change with the administration. So fortunately, I was able to get an interview with Neil Jacobs, who actually used to run NOAA. He used to be the head of NOAA. And so he no longer works for NOAA, so he can speak about it. NOAA, at the time was like, we can't talk about this. This is not something we can talk about. So he, being a former employee, was able to talk about it. And he was very candid with me. Super nice guy, really laid back. And I think it answered a lot of questions about the structure of NOAA, the history of NOAA. There's still a lot I don't understand about like politics and structure of government. So I learned a lot from that episode, and it gave me a lot of hope for the future as well.
That was a good one. And yeah, I mean, especially now with the new administration wanting to do Doge, you would think that, I mean, a lot of times it seems that weather, some people view it as something where we can trim back a little bit. But the fact that Elon Musk is part of that, leading it up, I mean, he runs SpaceX. I mean, weather is extremely important with launching rockets, whether they can launch or not. So hopefully he sees the value in the National Weather Service, at least as much as what I feel the values there. I was very enlightened with that episode as well. And sometimes if in the term people use in the industry is good get, and that was a great get for that interview.
I know. Huge shout out to Erica Grow for that. She's a friend, former TV meteorologist as well, and she works in NOAA now. And she was like, check this one out. Just give this one a try. And he was responsive, which was great. So yeah, that was my number 3.
All right, number 2 for me. This one is another great get. It's the turbulence one, Into the Eye of Ian.
Yeah. Okay. So remind me, this is with Nick Underwood?
Yes. And it was basically the video that went viral where they're in the storm. The dropsondes are flying around everywhere. There may have been an expletive or not flown around in the video, but just the amount of turbulence that they experienced in the storm. And then even since then, now they have an algorithm to come up with how turbulent was it in that storm to kind of quantify how bad these planes are flying through, the conditions they're flying through, how bad the conditions are. So that was one that most of the people I know probably seen that video, and to get the behind the scenes take from him, because I've always wanted to fly with the Hurricane Hunters. There was one time when I had clearance from them to fly into a tropical storm while I was already in Florida, and they were flying in and out of Tampa, but the storm fell apart while we were vacationing down there. So I was like, well, I guess that's not happening.
Oh yeah, the stars always have to like really align to get on one of those media flights. And then there's this whole factor of like, I am so scared of turbulence. I don't think I could actually do it. Like I want to see the video, I want to hear about it, but I don't know that I could actually do it, especially some of these recent missions. Like, woof.
I don't like motion. I get motion sick on like roller coasters. I won't do roller coasters, but in a plane, I don't mind the turbulence because I trust the engineers that put it all together, but it would freak me out, I'm sure.
I mentally do. And actually, it was never a problem before I had kids, so I still blame them for that.
What do you have for number two?
All right, number two is one we talked about already, Surviving Helene. So this one was about Asheville and the impact of Helene on Asheville. We spoke to Jason Boyer, who's the chief meteorologist there, about what he went through personally and professionally. I went to college in Asheville. I lived there for 4 years. I interned at that station. And so I certainly, am close to the situation, and I have a lot of friends there still, so it was a hard one to kind of put together. And then what I really thought was great about this episode was the story at the beginning of it too. A woman that I found actually on Instagram named Ashton, who lives in Lake Lure, and she documented on Instagram like her story from start to finish. And it was really some of the first images that people were seeing on social media coming out of Lake Lure and Chimney Rock area. So the information she was putting out was so important. Her emotion, her storytelling was great. So editing together, it was almost like a 7-minute audio package that I edited together. And I may actually rerun it in this episode if we have time, because I just think like it's a really great story with a nice positive ending too. So that's my number two.
She was good too, because she kind of dictated what was happening. It wasn't just you're watching it happen. She kind of verbally told you what was happening. So it almost like made it sink in even deeper.
Yeah. And, for a podcast, great as well, because, listeners could hear it and not just see it.
All right. Number one.
Can't wait.
I love learning things. That's the main reason I listen to podcasts, is always just learning something. So mine was forecasting the future of golf, because I felt like I took away so much from this episode, because you talk about some of the king tides flooding down there, and that played into this episode. And then just the way that the wind, the weather, the temperatures, the humidity all impacts somebody playing golf. And I learned a lot from it, and I don't think it's going to help my golf game, but hopefully it does. Hopefully I can apply that.
This was on my top 10 list as well, and it got bumped, and now I feel really bad, mostly because my husband was one of the guests on that episode, because he's a golf course architect, and we talked about kind of the changing, landscape of golf course architecture with sea level rise. So yeah, I'm really glad that's your number one. Did you know who Andrew Rice was before that episode?
I did not, but he was amazing to listen to. And his accent, I couldn't pinpoint his accent because it would change sometimes.
I know. I think he's South African.
Okay. Sometimes I thought it was like English, and then it got like a little Southern draw a couple of times. He was in the sayings that he had.
Made up. He's from Florida. No.
Yeah. He would have these like little catchphrases and sayings. Like it was very enlightening and a really fun episode to listen to.
You know what I like about him too, and maybe you've experienced this when you interview people, he's one of those people I interviewed that said my name a lot during the interview, and that always makes me feel like really good about myself when people do that,
Yeah,
so
I completely agree, Emily.
I should do that with my guests, Andrew.
There you go.
Okay, it just feels awkward. All right, my number one, you ready for it?
Yep, let's hear it.
Do you have any I guess you probably have some guesses, because I sent you some ideas, but my number one is Listen to the Universe. And this one is all about the sounds of space. So basically what was done in this NASA documentary, which I watched, they were turning images from deep space telescopes. They were translating that data into sounds, and they're called sonifications. And this is like a podcaster's dream here, because it's all audio. And it's also a dream for somebody who is visually impaired. And there's a whole community of people who study space who are visually impaired. So the fact that people can actually study the images audibly instead of visually is mind-blowing to me. And then also just being able to edit together these beautiful sounds and have the woman I was interviewing talk about them and explain, like, this is what a black hole would sound like when they translate. And it's not what it actually sounds like, it's this translation of the data that's coming out of the telescope. So basically the telescope's bringing all this data, we tend to see the visual representation, this is the audio representation. So it's a really cool episode to listen to, but like I said, also kind of self-indulgent as a podcaster and an editor. It was really fun to put together. And space is just cool.
You have a lot of science. I mean, you typically cover science, so I'm not surprised that it was a science one as number one. For you, when you
Mhm.
did the interview, because I listened to it while I was running, I couldn't see the photos. But when you
Mhm.
were talking with her, were you able to see the photo with the sound as she was talking about it?
Nope, I wasn't looking at anything, which I actually think helped. I looked at some stuff ahead of time, but her description of some of them kind of start from the middle and work their way out. Some of them would
Mm-hmm.
pan across an image. So her descriptions were really, really interesting. And the fact that, they could actually use these to, visualize in their mind what like these different space images actually look like. That translation, sonification, it's the whole thing is kind of mind blowing to me. And as somebody who can see, kind of hard to grasp as well, So
Yeah.
I don't
While I
know.
was
That
listening to
was
it, I tried envisioning what the photos look like. And I did go
mhm.
back later to try to look at those photos. And it's amazing, just the sound, how accurately they were able to portray the image that I then tried to look at later.
Yeah, and she said, they did their best to make it like a pleasant sound because nobody wants to hear like a screeching noise. So beautiful noises. So that one was a really fun one to put together. And I really like space. Another one of the episodes, honorable mention that got bumped from the list was the International Space Station episode because I just think space is so cool. And I was able to interview an astronaut, Stan Love, about his time on the ISS. So that was another good space one that I
I was
liked.
able to use the ISS podcast knowledge to talk about it on air this morning, actually.
Oh yeah, what did you talk
How the
about?
two astronauts are stuck up there even longer now. And I was like, yeah, they're
Oh
just
yeah.
they're just trying to soak it in before the ISS is eventually decommissioned.
Just falling apart. The whole thing blew my mind too, as far as like I thought they were just gonna like slowly break it down piece by piece. He's like, no, we're gonna crash it in the ocean.
Yeah. That would be
So that's
something
kind of
to go
cool.
and try to watch if possible. I know you can't be
I
running
know.
the crash zone, but as close as possible, because I'm assuming that that's just got to be an amazing thing to witness.
I know. I'm sure we'll see some images. Okay, well, Andrew, this is awesome. And I want to give a little brief tease of some stuff coming up in 2025 as well, because it's hard to think that we could possibly compete with these episodes from past years. But some stuff that I'm working on coming up. One of them being, we talked about it, part 2 of the tsunami podcast. So we're going to go deeper into the science of tsunamis, tsunami warnings. I'm going to talk to the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center about that. That's one episode I have coming up. I know you'll like this. AI. We've talked about AI and Google and DeepMind. I don't know if you saw the news about their
Mm-hmm.
15-day super accurate forecast. So I'm talking to Google about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Another one that I'm very excited about is because I'm dark. So, climate change is unearthing bodies on Mount Everest. So, there's been a lot of melting ice, and all of a sudden, these bodies are coming up because so many people have died since the 20s and 30s on Mount Everest. So, talking to a climate scientist, some people who have actually been there to learn a little bit more about that. And it's kind of fascinating to me because they're like frozen in time. So, you might get a climber from like the 30s who is like perfectly preserved when they died on Mount Everest. So I'm pretty fascinated with that. And then on that same topic of death, Sinclair's got a whole true crime unit. And so I did a collaborative episode with them because it's heat related. So we're going to talk about heat related deaths. And then also an episode coming up about fire weather prediction and how AI tools are going to be used for that. So
Interesting.
exciting things. What about you? You got anything going on in Ohio we should keep an eye out for?
No, I think earthquakes. We've seen to have a lot of earthquakes lately. I think, I don't know. We've had a couple of them here in Ohio that have been felt. So I think it's just, I don't know, something. Earthquakes have been a little topical lately around the area. So I think everyone's just.
You feel them when they happen?
I have not, but I know that the southern part of the state had one the other day where even like the traffic cameras, the Ohio Department of Transportation cameras were able to catch some of the shaking and stuff. So I tried to kind of compare what our earthquake was versus the 7.3 magnitude earthquake that we had just a few days ago. So just kind of showing people like what we experienced was nothing compared to some of these other earthquakes.
Yeah. Yeah, we get them frequently here in South Carolina too. There's a fault line, I guess. I've never felt one here. I have felt one in my life, and that was the one in the mid-Atlantic back in like 2012, I think it was. And that was wild. I was in a pool when it happened. So that was a very strange experience, especially never having felt the ground shake before. I think if you're on the West Coast, maybe it's a little bit more common. But yeah, people were terrified. Understandably so. Well, that's all I have. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, this has been a lot of fun. I will
I know.
make sure that I do not skip any episodes next year where I don't have to binge. But it was kind of fun to just, I probably had maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 episodes where I just binged over the last couple of days. And it was fun. And I was like, why did I skip this episode? This is actually like the golf one. I don't know why. I don't know if I was just busy that week. But I was like, man, this was probably my favorite episode. And sure enough,
You were probably watching the Masters because that's when it came out.
that may have been what I was doing. I could have listened to
See,
the episode
I
while
didn't
watching
think.
the Masters.
I didn't think. I thought I was planning it perfectly.
No, this has been perfect. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an honor.
Yeah, let's do it again next year. And let's do a collaborative episode too.
I'm down for that.
Awesome. Andrew Buckmichael, thank you so much.
Thank you.